Hello and good morning everyone. Let's start today's topic, and today's topic is exception handling. Today's topic is exception handling. Okay, so starting with this topic, I would like to share with you that this is one of the most important topic of any programming language, not only Java. It is very important concept for any programming language, because practically as a programmer you should know how to handle exceptions, because exceptions are the conditions that are not that doesn't look pretty good when you write UI programs. Okay, so any program having user interface like window application or web application, if you do not handle exception properly, it will not create a good impression on the users. Okay, so let's start exception handling, and first of all we'll see what is an exception. An exception is a problem that rises during the execution of a program. Means your programming is executing and suddenly there are some scenarios, some conditions where your program behaves abnormally. Your program does not provide you a required output, some error or some other things are obtained in place of the desired output, right? And exception can be occurred by different reasons. The reasons are invalid user input, user has provided some invalid user input, and device failure, loss of network connection, internet connection lost during the communication, physical limitation like out of disk memory, means your main memory gets out of storage. Code errors, if you write some code which has some syntactical errors or logical errors, those are also type of exception. And if you try to open a file which is not existing, so that will also raise an exception. So overall, exception is any condition that arises during execution of the program and that does not provide you the desired output. Okay, so an exception is an event which occurs during the execution of a program that disrupts the normal flow of program's instructions. If somebody asks you whether in examination or interview purpose, this two lines are going to be your answer, that an exception is an event which occurs during the execution of a program that disrupts the normal flow of program's instructions. When an error occurs within a method, the method creates an object and hands it off to the runtime system. Here we got to know that exception is an object in Java, right? As everything is in form of classes and objects, so these errors and exceptions are again classes, and there are predefined classes for these exceptions, and the exceptions that occurs during execution are basically the objects of the exceptions. Okay, then the object called an exception object contains information about the error, and this object, exception object, what it contains information about the error, including its type, what type of exception it is, and the state of the program when the error occurred, the program state where the line or the place where the exception has occurred, right? Creating an exception object and handling it to the runtime system is called throwing an exception. We'll call this process technically that throwing an exception, like our program is throwing an exception. Okay, if exception is raised, an exception object is created. The exception object contains information about errors and also its type and the state of the program where error has occurred. So this process basically is technically termed as throwing an exception. We can say our program is throwing an exception. Okay, now to understand how exception handling works in Java, you need to understand these three categories of exceptions. So basically you can categorize exception into three categories. First one is checked exception, then runtime exception, you can also say it is unchecked exception, checked exception, unchecked exception or runtime exception, and then errors. Okay, these are the three types of exceptions. Checked exceptions are the exception that is typically done by user error, problem that cannot be foreseen by the programmer. For example, if a file has to be opened but the file is not there. Okay, so such type of error is known as checked exception that occurs at the time of compilation. Okay, so these exceptions cannot simply be ignored at the time of compilation. At the time of compilation you get these exceptions. Okay, checked exceptions are compile time exceptions. Okay, now unchecked exceptions, they are basically runtime exceptions. Runtime exception is an exception that occurred probably could have been avoided by the programmer. Means programmer only can foresee the exception which are occurred at the time of compilation, but sometimes the program behaves abnormally while execution. Compilation is okay, but at the runtime when the program gets executed, then you get the errors. Okay, so these are called runtime exceptions or unchecked exceptions. Okay, and the third one is errors. Third category of exception is errors. Like, these are not exception at all, but problems that rise beyond the control of the user or the programmer. Errors are typically ignored in your code because you can rarely do anything about an error. For example, stack overflow occurs. If stack means memory stack is full, what can we do now? There is no code to handle this stack overflow, right? Memory is beyond the control of programmer code, beyond the control of Java code. Okay, you cannot handle memory using Java code, right? So such type of errors, exceptions you can say, which cannot be handled by the users are known as errors. Okay, so to summarize these 3 points, checked exceptions are compile time exceptions which can be checked or handled at the time of compilation. Runtime exceptions are unchecked exceptions that are identified or thrown at the time of execution, and errors are beyond these two categories, means user does not have control. The program automatically gives some abnormal error condition which cannot be handled by the user or programmer. Okay, now you can say the classes that extend throwable class. Okay, now checked exception in terms of Java programming, there is a class called throwable class. You remember this throwable class. Okay, so throwable class, all the checked exceptions are the object of throwable class except runtime exception and errors, and runtime exceptions are the classes of runtime exception class. So there are two classes. One is throwable class. Throwable class represents the checked exceptions, and runtime exception class, it represents the unchecked exception or runtime exception. Like, okay, so checked exception like input output exception. Yeah, this input output, like file opening, we are trying to open the file that is not available there, right? So these are errors occurs at the time of compilation. And SQL exception, some SQL code we are trying to write in your program, JDBC we are performing, and we are not able to write proper code, so you will get the error at the time of compilation. Okay, and the unchecked exception, for handling checked exception, you will inherit a runtime exception class. Okay, like arithmetic exception, null pointer exception, array index out of bound exception, these are basically called the runtime exception. And error is irrecoverable. We can't do anything when error occurs in the program, like out of memory error. Memory stack is full, you cannot do anything in that case, your program will close itself. Then virtual machine error. Okay, so JVM is working and there is some problem in JVM itself, so you will get virtual machine error. You don't have the code to handle this because the machine which is running your program, it fails. What can you do? So you can't do anything, right? So checked, unchecked and error. Now exception hierarchy, you see this diagram where the base class of all classes are object. In Java, the topmost class name is object, and the subclass of object class is throwable class, and then throwable class has two subclasses, exception and errors. Errors are like virtual machine or assertion error or any unwanted condition which you cannot handle. We have discussed it already, right? And exceptions, there are two types: checked exception and unchecked exception. The discussion is pretty clear from this particular diagram, right? So let's move ahead, and you can also have another diagram: object, then throwable, then exception, then error. Exception is input output. Here exception represents checked exception, and runtime exception represents unchecked exception, right? We have already discussed it. Checked exceptions must be explicitly caught or propagated as described in basic try catch. Okay, so there is a concept of try and catch. Like for handling the exception, we write the code, and those codes are written using try, catch, and finally block. Okay, now checked exception in Java extend the java.lang.exception class, and unchecked exceptions extend java.lang.runtime exception. Okay, good. So these are some classes of unchecked exception: arithmetic, array index, out of bound exception, array store exception, class cast exception, illegal argument exception, illegal monitor state exception, illegal state exception. These are some examples of predefined unchecked runtime exception classes. Okay, and then exception classes, that is compile time or checked exception, like class not found exception, clone not supported exception, illegal access exception, instantiation exception, interrupted exception, no such field exception. Okay, now how to handle exception using try and catch. So let's move and see a program that how we exceptions are handled. Okay, so let's come here and we'll see one more thing. When you have an exception, so there are three methods to show the exception details. Like suppose exceptions is occurred in our program and we have to show them to the user. So there are three options to display the information when exceptions occurs, right? So first one is print stack trace. This method prints exception information in the format of name of exception, then colon, then description of exception, and then stack trace. Okay, so print stack trace is one method to display exception information. Second method is toString method, and the third one is get message option. So let's see the example. First of all, we'll see print stack trace. Okay, so here is a class name is print stack. We have named it print stack, and then we have taken two integers. One is a equal to 5 and b equal to 0, right? So what we try to do, we see here is a try block and here is the catch block, right? So what is catch and try? Try is a block of code where you write the lines or program where you suspect that error can occur, exception can occur, right? So here in the whole program, exception can be occurred at the place where this division operation is performed. From the code itself, we can say a equal to 5 and b equal to 0, and we are trying to perform 5 upon 0, right? So you cannot divide a number by 0, right? So if such case occurs by mistake, so what will happen? You will get an error, and that error can be handled by try. Okay, so wherever you find that this code may generate an exception, that code is surrounded by a try block. Okay, ट्राई ब्लॉक के अंदर हम क्या करेंगे, जिस कोड में भी हमें लगता है कि एक्सेप्शन ऑकर होगा, उस कोड को हम किस ब्लॉक से सराउंड कर देंगे, ट्राई ब्लॉक से. ओके, एंड फंक्शनिंग कैसे होती है, the exception object will be generated here. Okay, here once the exception is occurred, so an exception object will be generated here. Okay, so probably what can be the exception, it is arithmetic exception, because arithmetic operation is performed. So inside the catch we will provide the class of the related error exception. Here we are performing arithmetic operations, so we have caught arithmetic exception, and E is the object of this arithmetic class, exception class. Now if suppose we are trying to access some file here that is not available, so here we will write input output exception, okay, IO exception. If we are trying to perform some SQL related query here and we find there are some options, so there are some exceptions that can be occurred for using SQL command, so here you will have catch SQL exception, right? So based on as per your experience, as per your expertise, you will be able to know that what type of exception may occur. So here in the catch you will provide the suitable class of the exception, and E is the object. So we have written E dot print stack trace. So let's execute this program and see what is the output. So if you run this program, you will get java.lang.arithmetic exception by 0, and at java exception print stack.main print stack.java line here is, see, if you click on this, it will go exactly to the place where the error has occurred, okay? So print stack trace method traces the exception, and it tells you exactly the line where the exception has occurred, okay? So this is benefit of print stack trace, okay? Now second method is toString method. So inside toString method, what we do, the code is same, try is surrounding the exception block, and then inside the catch arithmetic exception, and in system.out.println we have written E dot toString, okay? In place of print stack trace we have given E dot toString, the second method. Now let's execute it and see what the error it is giving us. See, java.lang.exception by 0. So it does not provide us that at which line the exception has occurred. Excuse me. Okay, so print stack trace provides the line number exactly where the error has occurred, exception has occurred, but in this toString method we just get the exception detail, okay? And then the third one is get message. So in place of toString we have called a method get message, and if we execute it, we'll find only divided by 0. This is the error description. So in place of using E dot get message, we will only get the E dot get message, okay? Only the error information, okay? So this is how you create the handle the exception, okay? So try and then catch. You surround the block with try statement where the error can occur, and in the catch statement you handle the exception properly, and you provide a desired message to the user related to that particular exception, okay? So we stop our lecture here. The second part of exception handling will provide you more details, more options for handling the exception. We will see try, catch, and finally we will see multiple catch, okay? We will see some handling of some user defined exceptions. So till then, you keep learning, happy learning, and keep learning Java. See you very soon, okay? Okay.